What time is it for you?
It is 5 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Well, that's not too bad. It's not too bad.
No, yeah, a cup of coffee. We're good to go. So
Yeah.
Tracy, I am so excited to have you here this morning. And we've known each other for a while, actually.
Yeah.
Meeting in New Zealand when I was doing missionary work and all the neat stuff there. And I know that we tried to do this on Instagram and the whole thing fell apart.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's do it on here. And I just would love for you just to share your journey, because I think what's really important to me doing these lives is watching, the deconstruction community become wider and bigger, and people are mass exodus from the church. And I think it's good to hear everybody's perspective, people's reasons why they were in Christianity, what they were doing, where they're at now. And that's the whole point. So I love it. Introduce yourself and just share a little bit of your story.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
Cool. I am Tracy McClark. Yeah, God, where do I start? I was born into Christianity. So both my parents were Christians. And at some point, my dad was actually a minister. So it was the only framework that I had growing up.
Wow.
But yeah, so it wasn't even a choice as such in a way. Well, it was a bit later on, but it was the framework that I grew up in. And but my mum died when I was 3.5. So, and I got a stepmom, I think like 6 months later, who was completely out of her depth. She was younger, and she married my dad and instantly had 5 daughters, because the church my parents were in when they got married, they didn't believe in birth control. So, yeah.
Right. So it was like like the quiver of children, that the blessing comes in the quiver of children. Oh, yes.
Yeah, totally. And my dad only had girls, so there's 6 of us girls. And yeah, but my stepmother was very, in hindsight, I can see she lived in fear, because the whole world outside there was an evil, bad place. So I was brought up to mistrust the world, mistrust people in the world, and you could only sort of hang out and be with Christian people and do Christian things. You couldn't listen to any music unless it was Christian music. It was just ridiculous. I remember when I was a child, I wanted to wear trousers, and I wasn't allowed to until something changed, and then we were allowed to wear trousers. I mean, oh my God.
You don't know what the change was?
I have no idea. But as a child, it makes you feel very disconnected to the world you're in. And friends, because you couldn't really have friends unless they were Christians. So it just narrowed your world down. And I was saying to someone the other day, I had no idea that I was an extrovert. Like, I thought I was an extreme introvert because of the suppression and the fear. But lo and behold, yeah. And particularly now, like,
I don't remember you being an introvert.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the church, just that whole suppression, the suppression of self, and self-expression. I remember I loved sewing and I wanted to create clothes, and I was told that I was vain because I wanted to self-express through what I wore and stuff like that. So it just shuts you down and makes you live in a world of fear. The whole thing with homosexuality and AIDS was in the 80s, and it was just so fearful. Like, there was a high school dance when I was like 15, and I wasn't allowed to go, like the school ball. I wasn't allowed to go because the theme was vice versa, whereas guys dress as girls and girls dress as guys. And my stepmom said, that's the gateway to homosexuality, which is which is so evil.
Oh, right. Of course. Right.
So evil. and so within this whole thing, I wanted to be a good girl and fit in, and and in some ways make my father proud of me. And so I followed along and did all the things. I got baptized. I remember even as a teenager, I began to speak at church, and and at youth group and stuff like that. So yeah.
What did you speak on? What were you talking about?
I remember even back then, I still really liked reading the Bible.
Okay.
And so by the time I was a teenager, I think I'd read the Bible through 3 times, which was not common because a lot of Christians have never even read the Bible.
Right.
I wanted to know. I had a thirst for knowledge and understanding. And so I did. I sort of delved in. I went to church camps and things like that. But then as part of it, like I got married at 19, pretty much so I could have sex, because I was the good girl who didn't have sex before they got married. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy when I think about it now. Yes. I mean, you know, it's because at 19, you don't even know yourself, let alone another person. I know, mm-hmm. I know, yeah. And you change so much. So, God, what else do I want to say about that? I don't know. It was just, it was not a good childhood. There was no love. We were to be seen and not heard. So I had no voice, no self-expression, no, just a whole lot of obligation. You know, we should, you should go to church every Sunday at least once. You should be doing this. You can't wear this. You can't be provocative. You can't speak out. Mm-hmm. You know, you're the wife. You should obey your husband. You know, it's just like you lose your voice. Well, I never had a voice, actually.
Right.
I never, you know, and slowly I was dying inside. Just slowly, just, it was just dying.
The confusion over femininity must be, must have been massive.
Yeah.
Because being a woman, I mean, I grew up in something very similar, very much legalism. And, women wore dresses and we cooked and cleaned. We didn't, we didn't change the oil in the car, even though I wanted to go change the oil in the car. Do you know what I mean? Like that was a work. And, I had to work through a lot of like the anger and the rage I had with a lot of that, later in life, but it was just a generation. It was a generation with which my family grew up. My women had a certain role, men had a certain role. And then if you mix the church with it and you start to mix God with it and you start to mix the Bible in with it, well, then now you're heaping, more issues upon more issues, because now it's like, well, God said, I have to submit. God said, like the fear of displeasing God. You don't want to displease God.
Yes. Yeah. Because there was this narrow line that you walked along. I remember them talking about a ditch. There was the narrow way with the ditch either side, and you could fall off and go into hell and lose your salvation. Your salvation was so easy to be lost.
Yes. Yes, I remember that. And your fear, the fear of doing anything, because of that ditch. We had something similar. We had like, it wasn't a ditch. It was like this big cavern or something that like, you're headed towards. And it was like, you couldn't stop that. It was like the minute you got on this bad road, like if you were cigarette smoking, which, I did, I was cigarette smoking, but there would always be this like feeling that God is watching out. He's watching. He's watching.
Yeah.
If your mom or dad doesn't see it, the eye. Like in The Handmaid's Tale, the eye is watching. Yes.
Yeah. So much guilt and shame about even natural bodily functions. I remember my stepmom once caught me once. I had borrowed a book off a friend, and it was like an erotic novel, and And it was like, oh my God, this is a whole new world, and masturbation and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she caught me once, and it was just like, I think I got whipped for that. Like, it was just so evil, so bad, so bad. So it's the suppression of so much suppression. So yeah. So
now when I met you in New Zealand, you were in the charismatic church, you were all of that. So how did you transition from, there's a high legalism, but you can also find it in the charismatic church, but how did you move? What was your progression from your childhood?
I don't know.
Church and
when I got married, we moved to the UK, and we were in a very conservative church there. But then when we came back to New Zealand, we joined the AOG, Assemblies of God, which was more happy clappy, Pentecostal, the whole thing. So that's sort of where that transition happened. But still a lot of shame, still a lot of rules and suppression of women too. You don't realize till you come out how suppressed women are. We don't have a voice, we don't have a say. You're allowed to speak occasionally, when you're given permission, and so and then my dad died when I was 28, and after that, in hindsight, I never really processed the death of my mum or my father. Wow. And like 6 months after that, I had an affair with the minister of the church.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm right here with you. Yep.
Like, go to the top.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he was like 17 years older than me. And some part of me was seeking for my father's validation, for approval from my father, and also the whole suppression of myself, my being, my soul, my freedom, my sexuality. Everything was suppressed. But I had 3 young children, and it was funny because I got asked by the other pastor's wife. There was like 2 pastors, and she sort of not cornered me, that's probably too severe. She had a very strong conversation with me and pretty much said to me, because they knew something was going on, but they didn't know what. And she pretty much said, if I don't confess everything, I would not be forgiven by God. So, yeah.
Oh,
I know. And you so believe it. You so believe it that your salvation is so contingent on your confession, on your, it was pretty, when I think about it now, I'm like, that's just stupid. Like,
yeah. And what did that confession look like? Was it before the church, or was it before?
Yeah, and then it was towards them, and then he got his job taken away, and then I had to stand in front of the whole church and confess my sins and my shame, and I wasn't allowed to go back to church for 6 months.
Wow. And what did you do during that 6 months? Were they counseling you? Were they helping you? No, you were just tossed aside.
Yeah. I think I had 1 counseling session, but it sort of brought the whole guilt and shame even more. And yet underneath it all, I was deeply unhappy and felt so chained in a way, but I didn't know how to express it, how to even untangle that. And it wasn't until later on when I began to question things, and things came my way. And because I always loved to consume information, I went back to university and I studied. I ended up doing a master's degree in psychology, and that really activated my more critical thinking and assessing things and realizing there's this world out there. Because when I was at university, I was just a student. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't a wife. I was. So that in some ways began to be the unfolding of it all. And yeah.
Now, were you always a spiritual child? Because I remember with you, like spirituality. I remember we talked about lucid dreaming. I remember I'd come over to your house, talk about lucid dreaming, or you would talk about these different spiritual experiences. And I'm wondering how you worked out, I'm having these spiritual experiences. I'm also starting to question some things, but I'm still in the church with that. How did that all work for you?
Yeah, I don't know how that, I remember clearly as a child being in my bed and realizing I could come out of my bed and I could travel around the whole house floating, and I could see every room in the house. And I remember I had to do a special thing where I could lower myself to go through the door frames, because the door frames have the dip and then you rise up. And I would float around the house. And as a child, I just thought that was a natural thing you could do. Wow. That when you sleep, you could travel places. And only as I got older, and began to look into lucid dreaming and stuff like that, I realized it's my astral body doing that. Right. But luckily as a child, I didn't question it until a bit later, I think. So some part of me has always been very curious about the spiritual, about the astral, about stuff that's hard to explain. That
Now, did you tell your family? I mean, growing up, or was that kind of quiet? Right?
No, because there was never conversations within our family, because we were to be seen and not heard. So there was never any open dialogue about anything. So I had a very big internal world. My internal world was rich and full, and I read, I consumed things, So my internal world was big, but my external world was very small. Yeah. So,
now, do you think you went into the charismatic church because of the experience? Like, did you have experiences within the church as well?
Yeah. We
I do remember. Go ahead.
There is. What are some of the experiences? The experiences in the church are very real.
Yes, very.
Like, oh my God, what are they? The shaking.
Oh yeah.
The uncontrollable shaking, the laughter, the speaking in tongues, the even falling the vomiting, the falling down, slain in the spirit. And just like we were talking about before we started, which I had forgotten about, things like the gold dust.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That we had when we were together. I had completely forgotten where gold appeared on our hands and on our faces and stuff. So miraculous, amazing things did happen and do happen, and yet I see those things happening now in the spiritual community and other communities. It's the same thing, they've just got different names. Words of knowledge, prophecy.
Oh yeah,
it's psychic ability.
Right. Right. Totally. And so I remember growing up and being very spiritual and seeing angels and seeing all sorts of things. But again, it was seen and not heard. You couldn't tell anybody. So I'd be having these experiences at night and encounters and all these sorts of things I was talking to, that people would say you're imaginary friends, but they weren't imaginary for me. I was literally seeing. I didn't know that I was clairvoyant. I mean, the church, called it being a seer, because I see in pictures, I see visions, and I see the elementals now that, we were told we weren't allowed to see in the woods. I was experiencing fairies. I was experiencing all of these things. But, when I got into the church, the interesting thing was that was all cut off. Like you can't, don't talk about fairies. I mean, those are demons in disguise. And I was playing with Ouija boards and stuff like that, and things were actually happening, and nope, that's demonic. You can't do that. And so I went through this whole deliverance program in the church to get rid of all of those experiences. How dare you see people's auras, and so people were casting occult demons out of me. I remember we had this big long list that I had to check off, Okay.
I had that. No,
You
I
had that same
too.
list? Oh my God. Tell me about your list.
Yeah, I can't even remember. It's all those things.
Oh
It
yeah.
was just, and they were grouped into family groups
Yes.
of demonic things that come together as a family, and you had to get rid of the head, the leading whatever demonic power, and underneath it were all these things, and you go away thinking, oh my God, I had no idea I was full of so much evil. Like
Exactly. Exactly. And then what does that do? It heaps more shame.
Yeah.
Or guilt.
A total shame. And you stop listening to those voices. You stop trusting. You stop trusting your own inner voice, your own inner knowing, because the fear is that that's demonic, that's from Satan, it's not from God, or it's your own soul, which your own soul is bad and evil too, which the church speaks about. You can only trust the spirit, not the soul.
Well,
it's just like, what
the heart is deceitful. Yeah, totally. The heart is deceitfully wicked. That was the
yes.
And yeah, I remember I was sitting down to somebody and I said, well, I didn't know, like, this was wrong. They said, well, your heart is deceitfully wicked and who can know it? And it was so funny. It's so funny because I look back on that and I bought that hook, line, and sinker, which only increased shame. Yeah. But I remember I had a brief moment where I went, well, how can you know mine then? It says, who can know it? Then how do you know? But we didn't go there. I wasn't going to at all open my mouth and say, well, then how can you know it? Like, yeah. And I think that there's so many spiritual experiences that people aren't talking about. They chalk it up. I remember the Kundalini awakening went around like the churches like mad when I was serving in New Zealand. I remember that I had to read and watch this video. I think it was like a 15-minute video. And at the time I was like totally against the Kundalini awakening. I mean, I was so radical. I mean, you remember me. I was really radical. I was very much against the devil. I was against, everything evil. So then I went around and was passing out this, it was a little thin video. I was passing out. I think I might've gotten it from possibly people in your church, actually.
I know who you got it from. I know.
And I spent time at that house actually, and we would study the Kundalini awakening, and they would be like, and I remember thinking, well, that is mirroring what I'm seeing, but I didn't question it. And at the time I was so caught up. I didn't want to be around evil. I was, trying to serve God with all of my heart. I loved God, but I'm watching what's happening in the Kundalini awakening video going, gosh, that looks like I saw that in the Toronto revival. I think I remember that.
Yes.
In the vineyard churches. In fact, I think I might have done the same. And I remember trying to ask genuine questions. Well, how do you delineate between the Kundalini awakening and what I'm seeing with the moving Holy Spirit?
Yeah. Because it is
never
no difference.
Given a good answer. I wasn't given a good
answer. No. Yeah. It just shuts down everything. It's just, when I think about it now, I think it's just so crazy that,
And it feels like the church has relinquished, to be honest, the power they could have, the, walking in certain areas of signs and wonders that they could have, because it was all evil. Psychics, no way. You didn't go to a psychic meeting. Don't you remember in, the Old Testament where, you don't call up the person like that they say that's in the, and it's like, oh my gosh, but there were people who were genuinely having these experiences around me. I could not explain logically, but I had to doctor it up somehow and say, this is demonic. It's of the devil.
Yeah, that reminds me, because like with both my parents being dead, and because you're not allowed to commune with the dead, the church tells you that I cut them off from me. I cut that part of me off from me. And since coming out of the church, like, I talk to my mum and dad a lot now. I talk to them a lot, and I have consulted with a couple of mediums who have been in contact with them, and the things that they have said, my parents, my mum and dad have said through the medium to me, have been so spot on and accurate. And it's like I cut off that source of wisdom and connection and healing and the ability to communicate and even say how sad and upset and the deep grief for feeling abandoned by them, because I couldn't process it because I was never allowed to communicate with them. And yeah, so that root of abandonment just hung there, and in my relationships and everything. It was such a big thing in my life, the fear of abandonment. So I would abandon people before they could abandon me, and never truly had deep relationships and friendships because of it. But yeah, since working through that, and also I did an exercise recently at ISTA. I went to ISTA where I communed with my mother. And so I sat in one place and it was me talking to her, and then I turned and sat in another place at the other end of the mat, and she replied to me, and I felt her come through me and speak to me. And I felt this overwhelming sense of grief, deep, deep, deep grief of her leaving her children, of her leaving us. And so I felt it, and I could connect to it. And I talked to her about my deep grief of being abandoned and why did she leave, and had this beautiful conversation with her that just ended with this deep feeling of peace and love. And like this hole that had been there my whole life was filled. I felt the love of my mother. I literally could feel it. And yet I would never have been allowed that experience in the church. Never.
That's right.
And it's so healing. It's so healing to speak to those who have died, and receive their wisdom, receive their guidance, and know that they're looking out for us, they're watching out for us, they're sending us messages,
Yes.
And to me, that's one of the most beautiful things I've received since leaving Christianity.
Wow.
Is that,
So how did that transition happen? How did you leave? What does that look like for you? Because it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah, totally. It was a journey, but it began actually by reading the Bible. So I left Christianity because I read the Bible.
Yep.
But thanks to like John Crowder, he came and spoke at Life Church, a church near of us, and he was so radical when a group of us, I think 8 or 10 of us, went to hear him, and he was so radical about his perception of Jesus and the Bible and deconstructing hell and Satan. And I remember when I first heard it, I actually felt physically sick in my body.
Yeah.
Because it's like, how can you say these things? Because everything you're saying, everything I have ever believed or been taught is not true. And so it was just this feeling of nausea in my tummy. And then I just sat on it, and I sat on it and kept on mulling over it, and it kept on drawing me to it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna question, I'm gonna look for myself. And so then with my friend Louise, we went whole hog. Louise, we went whole hog, and we bought over a number of months every single translation of the Bible we could possibly find. I think I had 160 different translations, particularly the New Testament, and just read it and compared verses from each translation, like particularly the Gospels, the Gospel of John particularly.
Yes.
such a juicy gospel,
Yeah.
and then compared it in each translation, and the slant that the translator would put on the words changed the whole effect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it made us realize there's a whole lot more here than what we've just been told. And then you start uncovering, actually, there's other gospels that we've never heard of.
Gospels, yes. Mm-hmm.
And they're juicy gospels, they're good gospels, they're more into they're more practical, but they're more magical.
Yes.
They make Jesus more real as a person than this. And it just all began to unravel. And it's like once you open the door, it opens wider and wider and wider. Mm-hmm. And I remember just saying to Louise, so often, are we crazy? Are we crazy? Because we're thinking so differently to everything we're taught, and you just feel like you're going mad. Mm-hmm. Because the indoctrination is so strong.
Oh my God.
It's so strong.
Yes.
And I remember saying to one of my other friends, because she was like, I don't understand what you believe anymore. And I said, I don't know what I believe anymore.
Right.
You know, I'm not, but I'm not holding on to anything. And I said, number one, I am doubting the devil, and I'm doubting hell.
Yep.
And she was, and I'm like, you know, and if you don't have the devil or hell, you've got nothing left. You've got nothing left to sell. You've got no fear. You can't hold people by fear. Yes. Because there's nothing there. And she sort of turned around and she said, but you could be wrong. And she said, and if you're wrong, you could go to hell. Which is like, you know.
Oh, bless her. Oh, yeah.
I know. But this is the truth. And I felt her fear because I knew that fear. Yes. And she's like saying, but if you are saying these things don't exist, then you're going against everything you've been taught, your parents have been taught, their parents have been taught. And pretty much, how can you be so arrogant to say that it's not true?
Right.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The minute you question one thing, it's like you pull on a string and you keep on tugging and pulling, and it all just starts to disintegrate. Yes. It just falls away. Yes. And it's incredible. Yeah.
And it's very liberating. Like for me, that was my exact journey. The first thing that went was the idea of hell. Realizing where I was taught that Jesus spoke all about hell, I thought, no, Jesus didn't speak about hell. And then, you know, I literally sat down for consecutive years in a row with Jewish rabbis. And I tell people this and they're like, well, you know, they were Jewish rabbi. And I was like, but they would know, wouldn't they? Like, wouldn't they understand something I don't? And they began to unpack for me, literally the metaphors, where things in the Bible were just speaking to something very similar to like the Bhagavad Gita or different space now. You know, they were pulling in so many different things around me to show me this meant this, and then this meant, and I thought, oh my God, you mean that's not literal? You mean like Sodom? Wait a minute, what? Sodom and Gomorrah actually isn't about that. It's relating to hospitality. Wait, what? You know, like unpacking Jewish culture alone for me made me understand the Old Testament in a way that I had never seen it before, and made me understand the New Testament like I had never seen it before. But then these Jewish rabbis were really radical. I mean, they were part of the Kabbalah, you know, the magical sect of Judaism.
The mystical.
Yeah, totally. You know, the magic of it, you know, they called it magic. And they were opening up things to me. And I was like, wow. And they were into the Gnostic Gospels. I mean, the Gnostic Gospels for me were a saving grace. Because I had been so disconnected from the earth. And I remember the book of Thomas, and I remember Jesus picking up a bird and healing the bird. And I remember saying to myself, oh, wow, wait a minute, what? Jesus cared about nature? Jesus cared about the earth? And there was
Yeah.
a whole feeling of like, wow, I'd become so intellectual.
Mm.
My belief systems in Christianity, even though I had
Mm.
incredible mystical experiences. I mean, you remember that time I came and spoke at your church? And I mean,
Yeah.
crazy shit was happening. Okay. Like
Yeah. It was incredible.
full on power there of, of an
Yeah.
otherworldly. And even though I had all those, there was still an intellectual part of me with Jesus. And I felt like I had the corner on the market. And I remember your son, Daniel, coming
Daniel.
with the Happy Gospel book.
Oh, yeah.
And he was showing how happy the gospel was. And I was miserable. Because I'm trying to save everybody from hell. I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
I had this mandate. I gotta preach the gospel. I remember I wouldn't cut my hair because I wanted to win 1,000 souls, like to God. And I remember like all these things. It was like, oh my God. And he's bringing it to me and he's like, look, this is acceptable. And I thought, this is heresy. What are you doing? He's like, yeah, I can do things. I'm unpunishable. I'm whatever that whole book is. And I remember just thinking, you're going down a wayward path. But inside, there was this joy. There was this joy. The people who I began seeing deconstructing around me had a joy. I really was honest because they were getting free of the shackles of black and white mandates, policies, rules, all of that. And so I honor your journey to really take all these translations. I can only imagine that was just.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. But by the end, I was ready to let the Bible go.
Yeah, talk about that.
Which is an incredible thing because you got told it's a sacred book and holy and but by the end, once I had worked through all that, and also, so when Louise and I were discovering this, we were still speaking occasionally at church, and we began speaking more and more radically, the more we understood grace, forgiveness, all sorts of stuff. And then began to be nicely shut down and squashed, and to the point where I had to stop going to church because I was so angry inside with what's the word for it when you say one thing and mean another. It's the paradoxes, it was just like especially the worship, you would sing worship songs asking Jesus, please come and help me, please hear me, please hear my voice, please give me this, please set me free, please save me. And the key realization is we don't need to be saved. None of us need to be saved. We're not lost. We're not sinners. We don't need to be found by God. Nothing like that. We are always and always have been saved because we've never needed to be saved, really. We are God. Yes. We are the divine.
Yes.
All of us. Yes. Everything, even creation, nature, everything, even darkness, even evil, even badness, the darkest thing is still God. It is still beautiful. It is still the universe, the essence of life. And so going to church and hearing these worship songs, begging God to save them, to speak to them, to heal them. And it was like, I can't do this anymore because it's all lies. God hasn't gone anywhere. He's within every single one of us. Yeah. We don't need to be saved. We don't need to be baptized. We don't need to repent. We don't need to do any of those things. We just have to believe that he already exists within us.
Yes.
And even then, if we don't believe, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't, right. That's it. That's it. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So I just couldn't, the hypocrisy, that's the word I wanted. I couldn't stand the hypocrisy because once you see something, you can't unsee it.
That's it.
And I would be there in church and just simmering inside. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. These people I have known for 20 odd years. My kids have grown up with them. I cannot do it. And so I just stopped going to church. So I'm like, I can't be part of this anymore.
Right.
And the weird thing is, no one came. I think I had 2 people ask me where I was, why I wasn't in church, but they didn't want to know. They didn't want to know.
Right.
So they didn't ask. And I'm like, these people have been my friends, so-called friends. And they're not friends because I am backslidden. So
right.
I'm probably on a prayer list somewhere asking, that I'd come back and repent. And so even the so-called friendships that I had made just dissolved.
Oh, mine too.
But in some ways, it gave me this sense of spaciousness and freedom, and I could just feel myself expand and feel lighter and lighter. But then after that actually became a lot of anger, a lot of rage, and a lot of anger to the church and to the suppression and to the suppression of females, to suppression of my voice, of my everything, sexuality, creativity, freedom. So I think for a couple of years I was quite angry.
Yeah, but that's okay. But that's good.
That's okay because it's not a sin.
Wait a minute. What'd you say? Wait, no, you're so right, because anger just says my boundaries have been crossed. Something happened that is wrong. And I remember, I mean, bless church people, and I still love the people I know for 25 years. But when I would share something, they would say, "Ellen, you're bitter. You're just bitter. You're angry. You're angry at the church." And I'm thinking, hell yes, I am angry at the church.
Yes.
I'm not even necessarily angry totally at specific people. I'm angry more at what I had been taught and how bamboozled I felt. And how I had given my life and sacrificed everything to something that wasn't real, that I didn't have to do that. And so then came I think the biggest one for me, I always say to people that I think the greatest lie that I ever believed in church and in Christianity was the idea of separation. That God
totally
was separated from me, even though a bunch of people came to Jesus on a hillside and said, "Hey, where's the kingdom?" And Jesus didn't look at them. He didn't say, "Well, do you believe in me? This was all before even his entire, death on the cross."
Yeah.
He is saying to everybody, "Oh, where's the kingdom's within you?"
Yeah.
Which breaks the lie right there of separation. And I think for me, I had to rage it. I had to anger it. I had to bitter it. I had to go through, I had to allow myself to not forgive. I had to do all that. I couldn't stay like that. That was not healthy for my body. That was not healthy. But if I think to myself, if I had not become angry, then I needed that was part of my seeing. That was part of my awakening to that God is so much better and bigger, and the universe is incredible, however you label God, whatever it is to you, than what I had been taught. I had been put into this box, not only as a woman, put in my box of sexuality, put in this box with God in this little box, and now it blew it all open. And I was running like mad to get out of it. And it's one of the reasons I left even the mission field. One of the reasons, because I just no longer teach people that they're going to hell. I didn't believe it. What am I going to do? How can I sit on this mission field and be genuine and sincere when I was just so sincerely wrong? And that was it. I think for me, that was the understanding that people just are sincerely wrong. They didn't know any better. We didn't know any better.
But one of the worst things too that I got quite angry about with missions and Christianity is it's colonization.
Totally.
It is we Christians thinking we are better than these indigenous cultures with their evil, bad beliefs. So we have to change not only but their beliefs, but the way they live. Absolutely. The way they do things, the clothes they wear. and the great harm that the church has done in so many Indigenous cultures that still affects them is so bad, so bad. It's just, but I never.
I saw that in New Zealand.
Yeah.
The suppression of the Maori people.
Yeah. And their spirituality, their connection with the earth, it's so bad. And I had never seen that until I stepped out of it. Yeah, but so then when I stepped out of the church and I went through the process of the anger and then worked through that as well and got to the point where when I changed my life and completely, went and did ayahuasca and decided to let go of my life as I knew it. And I had sold my home and I was packing up stuff, and I had these bookshelf after bookshelf of these Bibles that would have cost thousands of dollars, all these translations. And I'm like, what am I going to do with them? Like, they were my means, my pathway into freedom, and yet they've served their purpose. So I kept a couple that were really juicy ones that I haven't pulled out since. And then I boxed up all the others and brought them down to the church and said to the minister, you would know him, and said, would you like my collection of Bibles? And he said, yeah, I would love them. So I gave them to him. And in my heart, my intention was that they might set him free as well. You know, it was my path of freedom. So
right. That's beautiful.
But it was a nice feeling of just even letting the Bible go, even letting that go. And then I realized the more and more I let go of things, like I had accumulated, I had always thought I needed things to make me feel happy, like a beautiful home, a family, you know, nice things, nice food, comfort. And then the more I let go, the more I realized those things don't mean anything either. Like it's my inward being that is my source of joy. And the more I let go, the freer I felt, and freer, and I continue the journey of freedom by continuing to do those things which were always off limit to me, like exploring sexuality, exploring spirituality in a totally different way, you know. Because I'm still drawn towards that. I'm still drawn towards the mystical and the magical and the wonder. And so it's been a beautiful journey out. And I think because of the contrast of what I had, it's even more meaningful, you know. Yes. I take nothing for granted. It's the contrast makes it richer, makes it fuller, and it's really good.
I love where you're at, because I've been watching this, you know, you and your camper kind of.
Yeah, I am. I don't even have a home. I don't even have a home anymore.
I know. You know, you and your camper traveling around, and you're in spiritual communities, right, too? So, like, was that hard for you?
Yeah,
because I think, like, for a lot of people who are deconstructing, when they leave the church, it's like, where's their community then? Because that can be a real hard transition for people. So what did that look like finding community? What does that look like? It's very radical.
At first it was very lonely, because I spent 7 months in my camper van on my own, and I realized it was the first time in my life I had ever been alone. I had always been with people, my family, my friends, being married, my children, and I had never truly been alone. And so that was like the dark night of my soul, you know. It was like going down, and I had a lot of grief, and I slept a lot. And in hindsight, I realized it was because I was mourning. I was letting go so much and yet within the aloneness, there was a deep richness that, and I began to write in my journal, and I channel my own soul. I ask my soul what it wants to tell me today, and it would just, richness would come out of it, and synchronicities, and beautiful magical connections with people that I would meet along the way. And then I realized I could have magical connections with people simply by learning to trust my intuition with where I go each day. And I would end up,
beautiful.
I would end up in these amazing places, sometimes completely lost, and then someone will be sitting next to me and I have an incredible conversation where we both end up in tears, and you can feel that it's touched both our souls. And that's like rich food for my soul and for my sense of well-being and connectedness, because you can be with people, around people all the time, every day, and not truly be connected soul to soul. Whereas when you have a soul connection, it could be the smallest conversation or even glancing at another person, and you suddenly connect with your eyes and you feel their soul. And it's just like, and you feel it, it's a richness, and you come alive. Mm-hmm. And so that's all I did. I just followed wherever my soul led, and not judged who I would connect with and what they looked like and their appearance of who, you just don't judge. You can have the most incredible connections with a 1-year-old baby, or an old man, or a cat sitting on a fence, and so that's where, and I'm still on that journey. I'm not stuck in one place. I've been slightly more fixed, but I'm still transient, and I'm still following the pulling of my soul. Yeah.
That's
beautiful. And I don't know where it's going to go. I have no idea. Everyone my age is getting their retirement funds sorted in their second house and their boats and their cars. And I have less and less and less and less and less. And yet I feel really free and really rich.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's so funny hearing your journey for a second here. I have always, I've been living for 16 years out of different spaces and places with only 2 suitcases. So it's funny because I'm actually wanting to go the opposite direction. Yeah. Not have all this stuff like, over the top, because I can't live like that. That's just way too much for me. Like I'm still very much a minimalist, but it's like, I will always be traveling. I believe that with everything in me, but now I'm kind of wanting a place that I can just call home. Home is, where is home? Home is really within myself. Yeah. But this idea of a place that I can come and go from, because I'm always going to come and go, because that's who I am. So it's funny because I gave up all that stuff that you had. I remember, I remember coming to your house a couple of times when I was a missionary, and there was a part of me that was just like, well, this is all frivolous. This is all, what the world, and it's so funny because I'm on the opposite. Because I had given up all that. I had given up homes and families and done, living the celibate life because I couldn't, practice, being gay. That was impossible. So I was celibate and I, miserable at the whole moment, but gave away all of that. And now I'm going the opposite and realizing, well, actually I can have that. I am allowed to have that. Whereas the church taught me as a missionary to kill all that, even in the midst of the prosperity message. I wasn't sure how that all worked, but we had to we had to kill all that. So it's interesting to see your journey. That's beautiful.
Yeah, but then it comes down to, it's not a rule.
That's it.
It's every person's soul journey. And it's unique. It's unique to them. I think the only common denominator is listening to your own soul.
That's correct.
Yeah, because it's going to look different for every single person. Yeah.
And it's not going to be the same. That's beautiful. Oh, Tracy, I love the journey. I'm telling you, when I come to New Zealand, because I'm going to again, I'm going to pop in. I'm going to pop in sometime. and just say hello, travel around in your little van with you. I'd love that.
Yeah. Aren't you going to go and do ayahuasca soon?
Yeah, I leave here in 3 weeks.
Woohoo!
I know. I know. And you know what? Let me, can I share about that for a second? So
Yeah.
Because I know you and Daniel have done ayahuasca, and I have been drawn to shamanic practices forever and drawn to plant medicine forever. It's been something that's been there, but it was like, you don't do that, that's like drugs, whatever, you don't do that. But I started really studying plant medicine in general.
Yeah.
And I was realizing the earth actually has all the healing properties that we ever needed. We've ever needed. But we were so disconnected from the earth, and we were only going to God or doctors, whatever. And so, so what I did was I studied ayahuasca, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 7 years, just listening to testimony after testimony, doing this. And the whole time the plant is calling me, because I really believe when you start to, this was part of my journey, was, you had to listen to the Holy Spirit in Christianity. Well, now I'm learning to listen to nature. And when nature began to call me, when the plant began to call me, then it was like, this is time to go. But I scoured it for a long time, because I wasn't going to go to, there's just some places, okay, that I knew to not go. I wanted to have an honest experience, a true experience that was safe as well, and one that was really authentic. So I studied all over, and I'm going to Peru. My reservation has been set now for a year, and I've just been waiting this out, to go. And then it's an 18-day retreat, and you do ayahuasca 9 times. And it's just going to be something for me that is not this like, oh, look, I'm doing ayahuasca. It's not that. This is a walkabout. This is just another stage on my journey. I need to do this. It's not like, I want to do it, but there's something within me with the plant that's just saying, hey, I want to do some depth and work. And I saw people's testimonies. People are coming to plant medicine and literally being healed of depression and being healed of things that they just didn't find anywhere else.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
I know. So me and my Amazon trip here. I'll have to let you know. And I got my journal. I got this whole little journal ready to go, because I'm just gonna write about experiences and things like that. So
Yay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Tracy, for just
thank you, Ellen,
coming on and just sharing your journey. I think there's a lot of people that will be able to relate to your journey. I think maybe you've given some people permission. That's my hope, is that you've given people permission to question. And is there anything that you want to say before we go, just for people?
No, I don't think so.
All right, there it is. It's all good. It's so good.
It is so good.
What was I going to say? I think there was one more. No, I think I'm good too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Yeah.
What a journey.
So good.
What a journey.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
It's so crazy. All right, well,
who would have thought?
Definitely. When I come to New Zealand, I'm stopping in.
Yeah, good.
All
good.
Right.
We can do some mushrooms.
What are you talking about? Oh no. We won't even go about, I have to say something quickly on mushrooms.
Yeah.
You know that I was totally, I was against all plant medicine until I went to a church and I saw stained glass windows that literally had Jesus and mushrooms. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because the church of back then,
they knew
accessing the plants for awakening, spiritual awakening.
Yes.
But that's a whole other conversation. We'll leave the audience with that. Okay. All right. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah. Have a good day.